some timestamp here so that, yeah, you can just note in the chat box when you can offer POI or cannot offer any POI. So yeah, without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister. Time is yours.
Okay, give me like 20 to 30 seconds. Sambil setup timer. Hmm, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Oke, okay. Mohon maaf nih, roomnya menyeramkan, tapi ya udah. uh, iya, sabar. POI through unmuting yourself ya. I will take one, preferably from closing opposition, tapi ya udah opening opposition juga boleh. Oke, okay. Apalagi ya, udah ya udah. POI through unmuting yourself. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Pessimism disincentivizes individual to ask for a better future and will result into less political participation in your side of the house. This is why we regret the idea of pessimism. What we want in our side is just we regret the pessimism, right? I think a more neutral stance or to even a certain degree optimism will still probably work in our side. Our burden is to choose to prove why it is regrettable to do this. Probably an existing counterfactual is only on the basis of less harm existing in our side of the house. So yeah, we don't really have to prove on why neutral or optimism will be better, but I'm going to touch on that a little bit. What does pessimism look like, right? Pessimism looks like voicing indifference or voicing criticism to politics, such as interest for you to not vote or not wanting to hear in political debates, or even if you hear in political debates, you only hear to the points where you think there is a potential harm to exist. It looks like individuals not focusing on the programs that are provided by the candidates because they just focus on what things are flawed from the candidates. It also looks like individuals not participating in the political climate in itself because you have that pessimistic view, because you feel that it does not give you tangible benefit once you participate into this. 3 pieces of arguments, right? First, pessimism reduces the benefit of Indonesia's democracy. Second, criticism against government system is still possible without pessimistic claims as even better in our side of the house. Thirdly, is just wait. First, why pessimism reduces the benefit of Indonesian democracy? One is because the idea that you only focus to a certain degree only the harmful parts of the certain candidates or the harmful parts of the political candidates in itself, right? What does this mean? It means to a certain degree that the information you accrue is less of this. The prerequisite for democracy to happen, it means that a process of information between the political candidates and the one who vote for the political candidates needs to exist under a very healthy medium. Pessimism means you cut off half of that, you cut off any of the potential benefit because you focus only on the potential harms. Opposition cannot claim that you can still focus on benefit because in order for the benefit to run, you do only need to focus on certain harms that are going to be provided by these individuals, right? It means that your capability to partake into democracy in itself, to give you a good vote, to give a holistic vote as an individual, is considerably less in your side of the house once you only focus on one thing. This is why neutralism, or to a certain degree optimism, is better. But I'm going to explain, even if in our side, why optimism is still a better outcome. Second, democracy is necessary in Indonesia, especially for young people, because in the sense, these are the things that are going to affect you. These types of policies are exactly going to be beneficial for you. So my explanation on why democracy is lessened because of the access of information does eventually trickle down to the individuals. That is why this is actually regrettable. Thirdly, even if at best individuals do still participate in this with a more pessimistic view, their judgment won't be holistic. I'll take you after this. One, rational on how you vote with pessimistic views means you vote to reduce the biggest amount of harm, as opposed to an optimistic view where you vote based on the biggest amount of potential. Voting based on the biggest amount of potential is going to be the biggest or the most important tipping point in this debate. Why is voting on the basis of potential harm not good? Because in that case, you still have out mechanisms, or you still have mechanisms to mitigate this potential harm, right? In a sense where if you do vote to a certain candidate that does give you harm, you still have KPK, you still have an opposition party, you still have individuals that are able to mitigate this harm. But once you do not vote based on potential benefit, benefit, you do not have an opt-out mechanism of not accruing these benefits. You do not have institutions, you do not have individuals that are going to give you this benefit if this benefit doesn't exist. That is why voting on potential benefits from these candidates is the only thing you should do, because there is no opt-out mechanism of no benefits. There is still an opt-out mechanism of existing harm. Thirdly, the amount of information is the tipping point, right? The amount of information, once you are not that pessimistic, means you accrue more information in itself, which means you make a more rational decision, which means your participation in democracy is better, but it means your ability to actually give criticism, your ability to actually ask for more from this political candidate is better. I'll take you opening now.
So it sounds to me like all of these harms are perfectly known by youth and they still opt into being pessimistic anyway. It's unclear to me why you think their rationalization is not a proper or a good rationalization at this point.
I do think that you cannot judge it on that, right? If your pessimistic views, of course, you think yourself is rational, but this is a third person debate, right? Me as a third person, I can judge whether or not this pessimistic is rational for them or not, right? Because once you are pessimistic against them, you cannot see on how a counterfactual will be more rational in your side. But since we're judging on the third person debate, we can judge which one is actually more rational, which one is more preferred, right? I don't understand. Okay, second, why criticism against government system is still possible without these pessimistic claims and will be better in our side of the house? One, even if we do have an optimistic views, there are still feedback system onto the political system and how it could be better. But there are also preferences, right? You voice to the candidates that, hey, your system is good, but we do prefer this. Or there are still mediums for you to voice certain amount of preference, which is still at the end of the day a system of feedback similar to criticism, which still at the end of the day gives you a certain amount of benefit in itself. It means that criticism could still exist in the form of preference in itself. We do prefer this more, we do prefer this more, rather than tackling them down. But secondly, ops best case, even if criticism do exist significantly more in opposition, there needs to be characterization on what the criticism is, on how it focuses on bad parts. I'm going to explain why criticism is worse in their side of the house. Once you focus only on the bad parts of this, right? The voice of preference still there, government will, and some people generally. Once you only focus on the bad parts of the criticism, it means at best the benefit you accrue is a system of you not being able to gain certain not being able to accrue this potential harm, right? But why do you think under principle the best case in yeah, and the best case is in I'm going to judge on principle best case in both sides. Sorry, I got bingung. People's ability to not feel harm gives you less catharsis to the political system, right? Assuming ops policy work, at best their benefit is you not experiencing potential harm, because even if you are able to mitigate this harm, you do not have a delta, right? You at this point do not get worse, but you don't know what will happen if it gets worse, so you do not have a comparative. It means that the individual benefit you gain from this system of criticism, from this system of pessimism, does not give you catharsis. Comparatively, in our side of the house, potential benefit means you do get that system of comparative, you do get that system of catharsis. You are in a system of oppression, you are in a system of benefit, and then once this potential benefit does fall onto you, you do get a certain system of benefit, you do get a certain system of catharsis. So in comparative in both sides of the house, if we do assume that the amount of potential harm is same with the amount of potential benefit, in our side of the house, you realize more on the potential benefit and it is trickled down to the people more. But why is this important? Because one, it increases the political buy-in of people to the system because they do feel benefit from is the best case in both sides. Two, it also increases discourse between people and government, which is the biggest tipping point in terms of political mobility, right? This is why we are proud to propose.
All right, thank you, PM, for that speech. To open the case from opening oppositions, I call upon the LO. LO, are you here?
Bentar, kayak ke disconnect deh. Wait, let me contact. Bentar ya.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Oh ya, disconnect. Bentar. OTW masuk.
get confirmation if I'm connected or not. Check, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, but can you speak like yeah, lebih kencang aja sedikit.
Okay, sure my best. Bentar ya, gue disconnect. So
Sure.
give me like 30 seconds. Cool. I assume I'm audible. I'll take POI.
Yeah, loud enough.
I'll take POI in the form of just unmute yourself. I will not be looking at the chat. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. The fundamental truth that must be realized in this debate is that pessimism is an act of self-defense. It is the act of staring into the open jaws of a beast and telling yourself that you do not have to jump headfirst into its maw, that you do not have to expose yourself to the greatest of harms, may instead opt to cut your losses and spend your efforts to arm yourself against the difficult times that are ahead. We think three things broadly in this speech. First, I'm going to talk to you about why the condition is extremely bleak right now and worthy of being pessimistic about. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why pessimism is a moral choice for an individual to make. And lastly, I'm going to talk about why you are going to be able to access better things than the alternative when you are not investing in changing the political landscape, for example. So firstly, on why the condition is extremely bleak and worthy of being pessimistic about. This debate must recognize that we are operating in the context of an extremely sheer and bleak condition of Indonesian political climate, which currently pervades which currently pervades our society, right? Where the options that we have are extremely limited and none of them are very good. 5 reasons for this. Firstly, I think that we have access to 3 horrible apparent candidates right now who are all part of the established political elite, beholden to the game of horse trading that has so long pervaded the upper echelons of politics that they are always beholden to, for example, the political parties that raise them and must make choices that benefit the political elite rather than benefiting the people, for example. They are willing to look out for their own interests even at the expense of people at large, and they have no qualms about engaging in tactics like identity politics or actively lie and overpromise on their policy platforms, and are willing to galvanize like tensions between minority groups, for example, in order to push forward their own political agenda. We say that all of these qualities make sure that whatever choice you make in this election is not going to be one that is beneficial for Indonesia, right? Secondly, we think that there's also an active limitation of voices that is happening currently, that there's a prevalence of buzzers, for example, that are inflaming political tensions, and the existence of tools that preserve the power of the political elite to tramp down on these on voices against them, like UU for example, and their willingness to sue individuals who dissent against them. There are also the condition of youth and millennial parties like PSI who is losing their values by appointing political elites like Kaisang Pangarap, for example, instead of doing what they promised at the outset, which is championing the rights of people who are politically locked out of the system right now. There's also, fourthly, we think that there's also a current scenario of doubling down on impartial bodies like KPK. We are defining their capability to check and balance the power of the political elite. And fifthly, there's also a government failure in general of providing welfare, in the sense that there are lots of money that is lost in translation because they're being corrupted by government bodies, and none of it really manifests into a structure of power for these individuals who are on the ground, right? Mind you, this content is directly engaging to the entirety of opening government's case, because all of their benefit regarding collective action is only relevant when they can prove to you that a path to significant improvement not only exists, but is likely to be achieved when individuals are optimistic about them, right? We have heard no elaborations on why the status quo is able to accommodate that, and therefore none of their case can really thrive, right? Because it demands them to explain how the dated and incredibly established rot currently entrenched in Indonesia's political scene can be excised. They have to deconstruct the reality of incredibly prevalent corruption and lack of good options, and all of this combines to mean that the situation in which we find ourselves is incredibly dire, and we need to prepare ourselves both emotionally and materially against that, right? So second contribution, why pessimism is a moral choice to make. First layer, I think that pessimism is a form of self-defense, because to have faith in the democratic process is to expose yourself to any number of harms the moment that that trust is betrayed. We say these are things like that crushing letdown of having allowed your hopes to rise high, imagining a brighter future for yourself and for your country, and that sharp pang of betrayal you feel when all of it is revealed to be for naught, that you have supported a tyrant and your hopes for a better future is completely crushed underfoot, and the regret of having made a choice to support a candidate who lies and overpromises, for example, and constantly imagining what if scenarios. What if I had chosen another candidate with another platform? Would they have made a better choice instead? For all of the reasons that we posited to you in our first content, we say it is very extremely likely that you will be exposed to all of these harms because the candidates, any of the candidates, are fully willing to betray you for their own gain, right? Pessimism then is a crucial form of self-defense that's morally good and important for you to carry out. This is important because first, we think that self-defense is independently good and that you ought be able to judge how the situation will affect you in specific and make the choice to shield yourself from the worst of that access. But secondly, I think that pessimism is especially important for vulnerable and disenfranchised communities. We're talking about the Chinese Indonesian people who are still haunted by the specter of 1998. We're talking about Christians who are jailed for speaking out against Azad. We're talking about gay people for whom it's likely that they will not be able to gain basic civic rights for the next 50 years. Pessimism allows you to come to terms with this reality and not expose yourself to ill-fated hope. It allows you to preserve your own emotions against that crushing reality, and we say that that is the most important contribution in this debate. We further say that the ability to be pessimistic is part of the fabric of democratic will, that it is a valid choice within a set of options available to individuals with democratic rights. That is to say, we posit the scope of the decisions that you are able to make as a democratically endowed individual must be total, including the choice to not make a choice when you know it will make no difference and whoever you choose is liable to betray you anyway. We think that an optimistic society is one in which the decision to not choose is frowned upon, and that is exactly why they are going to harm democratic will on their side of the house. Last contribution on why individuals are able to arm themselves on our side to better contend with bleak scenarios. We have to acknowledge in this debate that people engage in politics in a multitude of ways, and in the optimistic version of this engagement, you would likely invest significantly in supporting your candidate through your time, through your material means, for example. This means things like going to political marches like 112. We are becoming a political relawan for certain candidates, for example, or making the emotional taxing choice to go to war every day on social media against supporters of other candidates, telling them why the world is going to be so much better when they vote for your candidate instead, right? We say that when you are pessimistic, you are more willing to be able, it's more possible for you to distance yourself from these activities and make that trade-off with other activities that are going to be individually more benefiting to you, right? What you can do instead with the same resources, focus on your study and your work, for example, to arm yourself against economic shockwaves that's going to be created by bad policies and corruption, for example. You can have discussions with your family and friends, for example, regarding how to build a collective effort to protect yourself against political shockwaves. That means that regional minorities, for example, can consider relocating to another location that is safer for them, whereas in the alternative, they're going to say that we have to stay here no matter what. We have to fight for the rights of everyone within our country and damn themselves to condemn themselves to a life of suffering when their hopes are dashed and betrayed, right? We think that all of these trade-off alternatives can only be accessed when you are pessimistic and willing to abandon the larger fight in favor of individual stability. And we said it is a valid choice for individuals to make, and that is why pessimism has to be championed. Proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Ella, for this speech. To continue the case from OG, I call upon the DPM.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thanks. I'm not sure if I'm gonna tip your eye. Anyway, starting my speech in 3, 2, One, panel. The only way for you to create participations of youth in politics is when you give them good things to really attract them and to actually have this sort of incentive from them. The only reason why youth is interested in politics, for example, is when we see ganja being quote-unquote marakyat, for example, or how we prevent the corruptions of teachers in schools, or also what how Prabowo doing like cute stuff during like talk show with Najwa Shihab, for example. These are the good things that attracts youth to participate and learn about the political climate in Indonesia and how they can demand for better things and how can they actually expect a good political system happening within our nations. There will be two issues. Firstly, I'm going to talk about which can actually give rationality, point of view for Indonesian youth, but secondly, how this affects the political climate in Indonesia itself. Before that, 2 points of crucial framings. Firstly, let me just frame out OO. This isn't only about the idea that you're telling all these politicians has done harm, but the continuous emphasis of negative aspects underlining its emphasis of all these things. Because even if we are not pessimistic underside OG, does not mean that people can do shit and not get caught at all. They have to really explain to me why the emphasization is inherently important and exclusive to benefits side OO. Secondly, let's just say that OO has no explanation about how their benefits can actually exist. There isn't an explanation about political mobility, for example, because the principle of people doing this without like suffering, for example, can only be answered when there is political mobility that does not work. First issue then, which can give rationality POV for Indonesian youth. Firstly, there's just 2 simple things I want to note. Firstly, I think the only rational way of you really trying to judge something is on the magnitude of benefits that is given, not about less harms or not. Here's a similar example. A government might give a huge benefit to minorities or lessening the gap of minority and majority, but give harm to privileged individuals and majority. Those type of things are seen as bad under their side because it gives harms to people. But the comparison of side opposition has to defend will be about how it gives benefits here and there and not to minorities or non-vulnerables, but also give less harm. Second, I think the impact that they have is going to be a zero-sum game. So what? There isn't any benefits because weighing on harm does not mean the magnitude of benefits is going to be lessened. What happens under the world of oppositions is people focus on creating less and less harm, meaning less benefits also, and that is what they have to defend. But let me just rebut all these principle arguments talking about why pessimism is like a moral principle and a choice for a youth to actually opt into. There's 4 responses, right? Firstly, I think in extremely sheer end conditions, the best prioritization is when which one can provide you the best political mobility. We explained to you on how pessimism at best mitigates potential harm, but when this is achieved, you have no incentive to ask for more benefits because you're too focused on the potential harm that might be created by these politicians. This means that even if in the situations it's bleak, the only opt-out mechanism is being able to voice out a potential benefits to overweigh and neutralize the situations. But secondly, I think potential mobility is explained by individuals actually feeling the benefit, right? Because you cannot feel the loss of potential harm because for some reason you may not actually relate to the harms that the other people actually have upon, but you can feel the existence of potential benefits that might be created. It means feedbacks on individuals need to participate in political discourse exist even more under side OG. Thirdly, I think the basis of emotions of pain from a shitty political system is symmetrical. This means that a communal act to give feedbacks is the same, but the difference is the manifestations and asking potential benefits versus focusing on the harm, so still are benefits done. But fourth and lastly, in comparison, it is only a sad proposition. So you can ask for better benefits when you can literally like mitigate all those harms by adding more and more benefits towards this and look out about what is good quality of a certain politicians itself. Even at worst, that this is actually self-defense, like what L.O. told you, we say it's not exclusive because Kevin told you how this is good because how people that have an agile alternative to actually mitigate harms like having like undang-undang or having like KPK, for example, and many other things to help. So we think self-defense is going to be symmetrical at best, right? But let me just prove to you the conclusion in these issues. I think we proved to you that the only way for you to really judge something objectively when you weigh each magnitude of benefits, because if it's only harm, it's going to be bad. We proved to you how political mobility is important to be answered by later on. We proved to you the only way to create participations for youth is through having optimism, to having a good view by youth towards political climate, to actually have a good type of participations within all those things. But second issue then, how does the affect political system in Indonesia? Firstly, I think they talk about how there are like things about how you can actually opt out of like possible like distancing yourself to actually being like a political relevant, for example. Firstly, I think this is not something that is inherently relevant to begin with, right? I think in the our side of the house, we want to argue that even if on our side of the house that people are optimistic, I think these certain things is only for people that is inherently committed to political system to begin with, how they want to engage these type of political activities, for example, right? But secondly, I think these type of people still exist presently and symmetrical on both sides of the world. I don't think you can actually suddenly mitigate and actually push people to not be interested in like a certain political system to begin with, right? But secondly, talking about discussion can only happen when people are interested, right? But when you constantly bash them, they are not interested to opt into these things to begin with, right? Here's the thing. I think under our side of the house, we prove to you how we have a participation of youth. But secondly, under their side of the house, you actually limit the idea of participation because the only people that will opt into politics and care about politics will only be the people that is already interested in the very first place. You don't have any traction because you already say that, oh, our political system is fucking shitty. I think it's really bad. And all these politicians are dumb and not something that is good for the global community, for example. But let me just extend a few stuff, right? Firstly, when you say all these bad stuff, youth are less likely going to opt into any type of political thing that happens within the country, right? Clear reason. Firstly, I think you're more likely to actually opt into something that you think is inherently good because you think that it will benefit you as an individual. In the world of opposition, you literally drag down all these politicians. You say it's bad, so there's nothing good about them because they already assume it's shit, it's corrupt and undemocratic. But even if there is a good politician to begin with, you always find a way to actually drag them down and to always find a way to actually demonize all these politicians and to show that these politicians are actually bad. You don't have any clarity on your side of the house. Thirdly, I think when you constantly frame as if this is something bad, you really want to shame these people, how this looks like is how each of you are just trying to see the best in people and isn't going to help how politician works or even attracts any kind of participation. Thirdly, at the best case scenario, the only people that will opt into politics in their startup position will be people that are already into politics. You don't necessarily make niche participation. And if that is true, the impact is symmetrical under OG to talking about like fixed participation and etc. Right? But lastly, I think it's about devaluing the idea of politician to begin with, right? You say it's bad, you're not going to fix them, but you're just trying to pull them down. There's a few reasons. Firstly, it's the fact that you devalue political system. You continually shame these people. What happens is that people will never improve because they will try as much as possible to create less harm only and not about more benefits. Second, here's the comparison of the world of propositions. We will say in most positive way, we say it's good because the idea of you're really supporting and pushing people to create benefits and goods, and that is inherently great. Thirdly, here are the trickle-down effects. People will improve to really fulfill the needs of society and give benefits to vulnerables and not about counting whether or not this will create harms or not. When you focus on benefits and asking for more and more benefits, politicians are most likely to being pushed to fulfill all those needs of society, and that is good when you fulfill the interests of politicians itself to fulfill the needs of our nations, and for all those reasons, vote for OG.
All right, thank you, DPM, for that fine speech. Now to close the opening debate, I call upon the LO.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yep, perfectly audible.
Great. PI through chat. I'm gonna take one from closing. Please tell me your extension. As usual, I'm not gonna speak too loud. It's midnight. I don't wanna disturb everyone. So like if I'm inaudible at any point, please feel free to just interrupt me. I think another disclaimer is that might or might not be my personal opinion, mostly for the analytical purpose of the debate. So this is gonna be recorded. Chat. I'm not sure if the recording is gonna be published. Like, okay, whatever. You can do that. Let me show you what being pessimistic means. Pessimistic means you're being actively critical and you're actively questioning the things that you're seeing or listening. Kevin claimed that you don't want to listen. I would argue the opposite, because in today's debate, behind every turn off camera of the other three teams, everyone's listening to my speech with pessimistic attitudes. Kevin talking shit about me in the way I chat, CG questioning and preparing for a POI, and CO trying to find my missing links. Good luck with that. That means that what happens is that instead of you not listening, you are listening more for the purpose of demanding more accountability and finding the missing logic and questioning whether the proposals that they're offering to you are actually feasible proposals to begin with. And in fact, this is not only a manifestation of democracy. This is probably the ultimate manifestation of democracy, where your voice gets heard and you're not afraid to voice them out. I.e., you're not afraid anymore to criticize bad candidates because you have nothing more to lose, because you just generally don't care anymore. Even if Indonesia goes to shit, let it go to shit, right? I just want to voice out what I think I need to say. So what happens in Gov is that so what they say is that, oh, you're likely to be like extremely like optimistic, whatever. It's really unclear what their counterfactual was. But in this House regrets motion, you ought consider the counterfactual. That is to say, the most likely counterfactual in their side is that you're actively trying to work together with the government in order for you to make sure a better future for Indonesia. That means to some extent you need to do things like compromise. You need to understand that maybe this politician says these things because they need to be elected first, or maybe we should just vote Ganjar because he's the least, like the lesser evil. Like if you continue to do that, surely it means that you're not making any changes at all. But even if you don't do that, it's good. Because let's weigh what Adam said to almost no responses from DPM, i.e. using your limited time and energy for youth for your survival, i.e. studying things, going to pursue higher education elsewhere, for example, doing an exchange like me, debating on 12 a.m. Like, certainly, this is much more certain than putting your eggs in one basket of hoping that these certain leaders from a political dynasty will be able to listen to you while they are not able to relate to you, let alone listen to what you think is good for you. So like political mobility, if any, will happen in our side more, especially when you have something to offer, once you equip yourself with the necessary skills that you're able to develop. Like if any, like I think that's the best case, right? Because like in the worst case, probably if that's not comparative, like just probably not comparative. But that was a very generous analysis, and that assumes the best case of Gov of you being listened to. Very often you're not. You're seen as secondary, and because you are by and large assumed to either be very idealistic to vote parties that will never make it to the 4% threshold of the parliament, or you're gonna vote Golkar because your parents do so too. So it's really unclear to me what kind of political mobility that they say without absent any explanation from their side. The other thing that I want to weigh is the principle of a democratic self-defense. What am I blabbering about? 3 things. 1. The principle of democracy is derived, although not entirely, from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, who first introduced the principal social contract that works both ways, i.e. the subjects give their autonomy to the sovereign in exchange for welfare and security. And it's a contract, right? The moment the sovereign fails to provide those things, the subjects are no longer obliged to comply to the sovereign. And we told you a lot of reasons why the state has very much failed in this regard. 6 things we argue. 1, horrible candidates, right? Because necessarily it's either they're seeking Jokowi's approval or they're playing identity politics just because some candidates are of Arabic descent. He can by and large assume the vote of all radical Muslims. 2nd, state failure in giving welfare, education, and health. Things like massive inflation, price hike, rupiah devaluation against dollar and against practically any other currency. 3, active silencing of press like buzzer in Twitter. But most importantly, in vulnerable areas like Papua, you have lack of transparency. They say that they're dealing with OPM there. It's really unclear whether they're actually doing that or they're just oppressing the voice of the newly established provinces. 4, extreme race to the median by parties, neglecting the niche and unique preferences of individuals. Even youth parties like PSI are losing their unique values by like supporting Ganjar clearly or making sure that Kaisang gets to be their primary leader when they stood for the idealism of the youth. 5thly is the, massive restriction and doubling down on freedom and autonomy of independent bodies like KPK, politicization of law, i.e. in the constitutional court, where they, almost did, they almost allowed Jokowi to run for 3 periods. So Kevin said that, you have these independent bodies, like these independent bodies are not working anymore. But 6thly, any form of activism like BEM-UI are fucking performative and really disgusting. All of these entail a logical conclusion that it is just natural for you who seek for a better future to just be disappointed, right? Like you're supposed to be allowed to feel angry. You're supposed to be allowed to feel disappointed. You cannot punish someone from acting naturally. Before I move on to second point, I'm going to take closing. 3.
Sorry. Being critical is different from being pessimistic. Critical thinking is simply making informed decision regardless of whether you have optimistic or pessimistic bias. So please break the open clock about participation.
I would love to hear your clarification on how they're different and give me a chance to engage. Secondly, I'm going to flip democracy claim from Kevin, and I think that Adam did it quite perfectly. The foundation of democracy is what is known as the state power principle. Because the state have massive control over people, the only way that that power can be justified is if people have to be able to determine how the state will look like. The choice to be pessimistic and not vote at all, for example, is a legitimate choice, i.e. destroying your voting ballots by stabbing it multiple times or just talking shit about a candidate. That's supposed to be a legitimate opinion as well. Because the premise of a democracy is for you to make sure that you're able to find your unique preferences. If there are no candidates who are able to provide that unique preference to you, then surely not voting any candidates or surely voicing out actively against them should also be considered as a legitimate principle. Thirdly, I want to introduce a self-defense claim, and this is an a priori winning claim. It doesn't matter if it's not likely to change anything, but just that fight against evil is inherently a good thing. But that was very generous, because let's talk about consent. One, the efforts of social media openness or everything that Kevin claimed are exactly the reasons why youth knows what they're doing, but they're still opting into this anyway. Secondly, we told you other actions that you can pursue, pursuing higher education, for example, equipping yourself with skills that are necessary for survival. But thirdly, they try to argue about rationality that sounds really intuitively good, but it's not always winning, because humans are never rational optimizer of utility. Emotions that are by definition irrational are also even more important, i.e. you're angry to your parents who continuously to force you to just vote this specific person because he's not Chinese and he's not Christian, for example. And therefore, you're actively expressing this anger, not only for the state, but also for other oppressive actors that continuously dictate you, gaslighting you to know what you want to do. The importance of this argument is simple. In a political debate, we rarely talk about the hypothetical success or failure or the outcome of things like election that are very speculative at best. We say that insofar as people practice their democratic and moral right, that is a fundamentally good thing that ought not be regretted in all instances. Consider the vulnerable actor. Imagine being cheated on multiple times and still being expected to negotiate for the continuation of the relationship. You probably don't think it's a good idea. This is also not a good idea in this instance. Okay.
All right, thank you, DLO, for that speech. Now, to open the closing half of the debate, I call upon the member of government.
Okay, I hope this is not too distracting. Let me turn on my stopwatch. Minimize my dock window. Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. OG was throwing the benefit of participation without contextualizing why it matters in the current state of Indonesia. We don't think that the contextualization was there at all. That is why it's fair for opening opposition then question, why is your output likely, OG? And OG was willing to take that burden. They tried so hard to prove that, yes, this output will certainly happen. But as CG digress, we're not going to take that burden. So what are we going to take as CG? First things first, I would like to frame that what OO basically says to the judges is that all these boo-boos and political failures will somehow fix itself by slipping it off, right? They would rather sit back and watch the world burn. Yes, they did say that they want to do non-structural changes and approaches like mobilizing grassroots movement and making a lot of the social movement, right? As their solution. But I think that the willpower required to fight against an establishment and the looming giant of bureaucracy and corporations controlled by wealthy people relies on your ability as an individual to balance out your pessimism. Yes, pessimism is required to some extent to predict and prepare what kind of change that you want, but that is simply critical thinking, right? Your ability to solve problem and to try to come up with solutions is simply critical thinking. The willpower that you have to move forward relies on your optimism, relies on the positive outlook that someday, even if it's 100 years later, change is going to happen. And what you want to do as youth right now is simply to cement your position in history and show your existence. It comes from optimism. It does not come from pessimism. Pessimism debilitates you and it makes you unable to move. That's what it actually looks like. So what is the extension of closing government going to look like? We're going to simply bring 2. First, we're going to talk about the urgency. Why does the youth need to not be pessimistic right now in Indonesia? And secondly, I'm going to reclaim the benefit of activism and the growth of grassroots social organization. So first, we believe that apathy is currently exploited by the regime that is representing older generations. The delta is not that, older people are not willing to represent people other than Japanese and a majority Muslim religion. That's not it. The delta is the exacerbation of the war of class. So there's class war that is going on. OG only bring rational participation and voting based on potential benefit. This is conceptual. This does not answer the contextual urgency that I brought to you. So why is it not the time to bring self-defense, whatever that means by OO, right? The apathetic attitude is not born from the contentment and the safety feeling, but rather the feeling of powerlessness, that you're just a speck of dust unable to create change, right? So why is it actually possible for you to create change. And why is it so important for the youth right now to balance out the voice of the older demography that is trying to gatekeep the voting base, right? Why is it so urgent? So the context right now is that the number of voters that is legible in Indonesia, like youth that is legible to vote, is constantly increasing on par to the number of senior demography. It is rather polarized, almost like the condition of Republican Democrat supporter in the US. So it is very important for us to reclaim as many swing voters as possible, and we can only do that if we participate, right? This is really important because older demographics, I'm not saying that their concerns, values, policy preferences are bad necessarily, but it is quite outdated to some extent. Outdated in what sense? In the sense that the relevancy is questionable, or it only benefits, wait a minute, only a select number of people. What does it look like? Let's see the way Indonesia handled crisis when COVID took hit, right? The kind of economic policies that we take boost large business activities, local and foreign ones, but it prioritizes the people on the ground who rely so much on the provision of jobs and subsidy. Meanwhile, the youth in Indonesia at that time are not conventional business owners, and other countries actually are willing to slow down the economy and take more debts to ensure the life on the ground stay running. So it's a matter of prioritization, and our youth was not prioritized, right? This is the urgency that we need to, because we think the country caring about future generation is a mindset that is changeable. It can be changed. Japan used to be super elder centric. In the event of a nuclear leak, the elderly volunteered because they realized the importance of the future generation. Indonesia used to look up on only Japanese men as their leader, but right now we still look up at Japanese men, but at least the age are getting younger and younger, right? There's a lot of young male president. There's even a female president to some point. So we think that this mindset is changeable, but the only way that we can constantly ensure there will be change to this mindset is if we root our existence and ensure that our voice is never being swept. The way that our voice is not going to be swept is always constantly trying to engage in the structure of our governance. That is why we think that the problem of SE losing values by appointing Kaisang, like what I said, it's actually a problem generated by the choice of youth to prioritize your fear of getting PHP, right? Your self-defense. You don't want your feelings getting hurt, so you would rather not have the accountability, not have the ability to demand accountability from Kaisang, or cheer them for the fact that they're a fellow youth that breaks boundaries and enters the world of the governance, even if they're being labeled as, oh, Nebian, etc. You're not cheering them on. You'd rather just not support them at all. Yes, Justin, I will take you.
Not only is this repeated from OG, this is also very dismissive. Insofar as back half cannot ensure indefinite change, which you just can't do in a politics motion, let alone after 6 of our explanations to no response from your side, we still probably win.
No. I still don't believe that certain change is something that can be proved by both sides, because in your side, how is a entity such as trans talk or trans speak or LGBT speaks is going to make changes in your side? It's also impossible. And I already said that they can only exist because of optimism. So we think that the future outlook of the youth and voting is really important because there's a demographic that we need to balance out. That's why we need to constantly participate in the status quo. Now let's talk about my second extension. So the prevalence of activism is going to be discouraged in the world of opposition, and the growth of grassroots social organization is not going to happen, right? We think that social activism is a benefit that always exists, but it can only prosper in governance that extends the that only extends the participation to the most variety of demographic, right? So what is the ideal condition for the gathering and mobilization of mass? We think that mass can only gather and mobilize if you at least have some hope that you're participating in something that is meaningful and you are actually seeing your policies being talked about, being debated in DPR, no matter if they say, oh, this is agenda barat, etc. As long as you are still being exposed in official meetings and in official government discussions, that is the kind of history that they want to cement in Indonesia. That's why we believe we should not be passive.
All right, thank you, member of the government, for that speech. Now let's open the case from hosting oppositions. I call upon the member of UP.
Okay, sorry, can I go to the toilet for like quick seconds?
Yeah, no problem.
Oke, bentar ya. Okay, check. Am I audible?
Audible line selain nggak?
Okay, yeah. Wait. Waduh. Oh, it's here. Sorry. HP-nya entah mana. Alright. So POI through the chat box or raise hand. Okay, I'll accept POI at around 5 minutes. Okay. All right. Starting my speech in 3. Oh wait, hold on. Bentar ya, dok saya nge-lag. Oh yeah, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1. So OO is co-opting the benefit of grassroots social movement, right? Two things that we want to say to discharge OO's claim. Number one, the co-opted benefit of grassroots social movement will always be there anyway, as long as minority exists. Number two, the motivation to keep fighting a seemingly impossible fight is actually fueled by the hope for a better future, not a hatred or spite for the current actors. But when you stay pessimistic, there is no hope. And that's when progress or improvement for Indonesian political climate won't exist. That's why we regret the prevalence of that pessimism of Indonesian youth. There will be 3 issues, and I will structure my speech in comparing YCGs over OO, and second of all, YCGs over CO. Lastly, YCGs over OG. Now let's go on YCGs over OO. Under the issue of exploitation of apathy made by the incumbent regime. Grace told you in this very first issue, it's very immoral when youths have the constantly increasing number, meaning to say, practically in terms of bargaining power and also willpower, it's visible for you to advocate for change or for a better policies in Indonesian current political climate, right? Especially in the provision of protection to the minorities or even the favorable economic policies for the youth. But by being pessimistic, you extend the power of politicians that come from older demographics with outdated concern, values, and also policy preferences. And in conclusion, CG characterized that a country's tendency to prioritize certain demographic is a matter of mindset, and that is something that is changeable. By constantly engaging and infiltrating the government bodies through participating in politics as Indonesian youth, government side ensures that possibility of change might happen in the far future, regardless of how probable this change will be in the status quo. Government and the politician can only shut us down when our voice is at least heard first. This is only exclusive by optimistically participating in politics, by stating the youth opinion as the political party representative. When you demand accountability, when you demand inclusion to the people that you vote, in Indonesia, this approach is much less demonized in comparison to doing oration in the street, doing demonstration, or even mobilizing underground, and etc. Let's see how OO responded to this case. 2 things. Number one, they told us that pessimism equals to self-defense because they believe to have faith in democratic process and constantly betrayed, therefore they need to defend themselves. My question on OO is that what is the outcome of that pessimism? It does not translate into any defense at all. 2 responses and 1 way. First response is on this one. There is no process made by OO. Okay, it defends them from having delusional hope of false promises made by political candidates, but that defense does not impose any immunity of them from intolerable policies, discriminative policies, or even neglect made by the regime, right? Especially in the context of identity politics in Indonesia that is very, very much strong. Sadly, current regime does not see any benefit from catering to the minority due to them having less numbers for their electability. Thus, by staying silent and doing nothing, we don't think that gives you any benefit in some sort of way. But even if it gives the youth some sort of defense by disengaging themselves from the flaws of the Indonesian political climate for their mental well-being, the benefit is only for individual scale, which is small and not magnified. In comparison to CG, we give you bigger scale of benefit by not being pessimistic. Why? By being optimistic and advocating for a change that is applicable to all youths, we are pushing for changes that can be felt among Indonesian youths out there. Thus, in terms of the scale of benefit, we are much more magnified because the benefit can be felt by many Indonesian youths out there. Okay, OO may say, in the worst case, our advocated change is not taken into account in the form of follow-up action, for example, like economy policy changes or formulation. But still, when we voice out the urgency, it's spotlighted. When it's spotlighted, it's going to be utilized by future political candidates anyway who wants to win. Thus, they're going to cater the youth's aspiration for their possible and continued electability. So the way that you should take is 2. 1, we have the bigger scale of benefit in comparison to OO. 2, we give you the mitigation of harm in the worst case scenario. So therefore, on the first idea, it goes to CG. Secondly, they told us about how vulnerable people need to preserve their own emotion in battling reality. For example, like Chinese Indonesian, gay people, and etc. 2 layers of responses and 1 way. Number 1, we don't think that that's what they want. They need the mercy of the youth. Sadly, in OO, it's as if they assume all youths are homophobic, racist, or even Christian phobic. That's why they have to stay pessimistic. But that is not the thing. When it comes to listening and advocating for minorities' political grievances, we need activism and social organizations that are willing to advocate for them. What is the prerequisite? Second layer, will enable social activism to fight for the cause and etc. Even further, participation of the youth is very exclusive, right? Because of the attractive packaging that ensures engagement and participation. For example, in talk show, they use lots of anecdotes or jokes to maximize the audience's engagement, or content in social media that is very appealing and entertaining. For example, infographics in X, Reels on Instagram, or even TikTok FYP videos. Therefore, the way that you should take in this response is that 1, which one that can answer the most tangible demand of the minority, it goes to CG. Second of all, the exclusivity of the youth participation in accommodating the tangible demand. We told you youth utilizes attractive packaging that ensures engagement and participation. Now, that's why CG is over OO. Before CG is over CO, yes? Yeah, OO.
So the problem with this case is not only that this is not characteristic of the counterfactual, i.e. that's probably not likely going to happen, but I think insofar as CG still cannot prove the certainty of this benefit, i.e. you cannot necessarily predict whether or not these things are going to happen based on all the reasons that we argued and never been responded by Goff. We also told you there are benefits that, our case that is independent and practical outcome insofar as pure, like manifestation of emotion that I think ought to be accommodated and ought not be regretted.
The problem is that in the case of uncertainty, that's also the symmetrical harm that is imposed in OO that is never explained on how you're going to battle that kind of uncertainty. So yeah, let's just discharge that one. Now, in comparison to CO, in terms of discourse, participation in OG was not picturized. Participation OO was also in the best case. Let's just engage to CO in discourse. Simple. We think in CO, there is never any process as to how the discourse will be catered under their side of the house, right? Because we told you specifically, minorities are not considered as a potential voter base. Even further, when they stay pessimistic or the youth stay pessimistic, there is no necessity or urgency to cater to them at all. At least we told you on the exclusivity of youth. By appealing packaging, we prove you why at the end of the day, when youth creates the discussion out of the optimism, there is an incentive for the minorities to finally open up under our side of the house. So yeah, the weighing is simple in our side of the house. Yeah, not only that we regret the prevalence of pessimism of Indonesian youth in Indonesian political climates, we also regret the prevalence of pessimism of the Deputy Prime Minister for the upcoming NSDC, because she'll definitely do great in NSDC. I have so much faith on her. So for Aska, break legs, and yeah, you have nothing left to prove. We propose.
All right, thank you, Government Whip, for that speech. Now, to close the entirety of the debate, I call upon Upwhip.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
POI preference, just chat box. Going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that the OG is being optimistic, almost too optimistic that they're being almost ignorant. Because then why? Their main stance is going to be how then the voice of criticism is happening on their side, but also on how the criticism in itself is going to be potential. First response, this kind of potential, exactly when you're being too optimistic, is that the kind of potential that you are going to be focusing on how these political candidates is only what is going to be attracting the youth. For example, you're interested in Prabowo's aesthetic fits, Prabowo's dances, and etc. Or second, you're being offered positions and this manifesto eventually you will lead. This manifesto eventually you will lead to. I'm sorry. eventually you will ignore those harms and not being able to see the actual potentials on how the good governance is going to be, on what is actually substances on the political stance. You are just only going to be as youth, you are just going to be you are just going to be focusing on what are the potentials that interest you, because then why my member already told you, the characterization of the politicians itself are already corrupt. They only want to bring the enemies closer to them, in which that they're going to manipulate you into thinking that this is what best for you. They're going to manipulate you for the fact that I have what is your interest, and for the fact that the youth for the fact that the youth are easily are not going to be easily just losing to the enemy side, because then why? Because this happens when you're being too optimistic, even almost as ignorance, when they're saying that the force of criticism is going to be happening, because but this is counterproductive when they're saying that their arguments is also including the fact that they're going to trust on institutions, right? You said that they're going to be check and balances on political opposition on political oppositions or topic and etc. But exactly this is going to be counterproductive on your saying on how then on your side there's going to be criticism happening, because then even in good governances you need those people, other people, to be able to be able to oppose you, to be able to critique you. But in your side you're just going to be optimistic, and the rationality is not going to be happening either, because then you're leaning too much into okay, this is a good governance, even though we can make changes, even though we can make changes, it's what we can settle for anyway, right? So so the old is not any better when they're trying to be okay, you're pessimistic, but you're almost as pessimistic for the youth is, because then the still contributions to you is that we are explaining on how then the youth pessimism is eventually going to lead on how that they're going to be possible to make changes for themselves, not towards political agenda or political candidates, because then, like we said, the pessimism towards the political itself coming from and also this is what the OG and OO trying failed to explain. We think that, like my members said, the pessimism itself coming from the government's failure, and the government's failure to protect them, to be able to be able to tell you, which is why we think that it is better for those youth to be able to which is why we think that it is better for you to be able to be okay with your status quo, for the fact that as youth you have your own power, you have your own capabilities to make changes. Even this is being tried to ignore by the CG, because
Hi. Option Whip. I think like you were unmuted. Yeah.
oh sorry, really?
Yeah. I
Dari
think
awal
like
ya?
no. I think like when you talk about social changes is being ignored by the closing government.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
So
You can just start from there. Yeah.
So moving on, this is being sleep because then the CG is trying to also be pessimistic, because the social changes is going to be ignored by the government. The changes is going to be only happening by 100, for example, which is why we think that it is better for the youth to be pessimistic towards them, to be able to take the power into their own hand. Because then eventually, when you're optimistic, you think that the government is going to do anything to you, and you think that you can only voice your criticism in hope that eventually you will be heard. But this is not most often of the case, right? The status quo right now is CJ eventually agrees to us, then the possibility of change is only going to be happening on CO, right? So what differs CO from OO is for the fact that when they say that pessimism is a moral choice and self-defenses, we think that it's also some kind of pessimism on youth, because then my members already told you that what our contributions is for the fact that not eventually we will trust the government or not. It's not only like that, but also for the fact that our contributions is going to be whether this pessimism will lead to better improvement. This pessimism will be possible for the youth, because then you're taking the matter on their own hands and not losing to the enemy side, right? Because then also what makes CEO better than OG, because then the OG would only explaining to you the optimistic side and the good governance side, and being very ignorant on how then you're and being very ignorant on how then, even in political instability situation in which the youth are really tired of their voices not being heard, how then you're going to be eventually just trusting those political party opposing or KPK and those institutions anyway. Okay, is there any POI?
Yeah, opening. Loss of potential harm is intangible. If your salary is 3 million and there is potential that it will become 2, it did not happen, you cannot feel that. But potential benefit is tangible. If it goes to 4, you know it happened. This information is prerequisite for political participation.
Yes, but we think that the correlation when you said that the potential of criticism is going to be happening better on your side when your critics is going to be filled with potentials, we think that you cannot separate or cannot separate or see the differences in which that those potentials are eventually not leaning to their side or not leaning to full trust on the government. You are not being very clear on how the form of potential itself is not eventually going to giving up yourself to the enemy side, right? You're only saying that this potential is in this form. This potential is that you have to believe that there is some good in the government after all. But we think who can champion this debate is who can offer to you that what is the interest of the youth itself, and how then the youth can take the power by saying that by being pessimistic, they're capable of making their own changes without actually leaning back and wait what is going to be done by the government and etc. Proud to be CEO.
All right, thank you everyone. That remarks the end of the debate. Me and panel will deliberate for like 15 minutes. We'll come back here for like 12:30. So yeah, in that meantime, you can just grab snacks, grab drinks, and thank you for letting me judge this Jurassic Park rounds. And yeah, best of luck for the results.
Thank you very much.